Volume 2, Book 1, The Feast of Pikes. And when we talk about the Feast of Pikes, we talk about this event here, Fête de la Fédération. Massive holiday festival held throughout France in 1790 in honour of the French Revolution. If we give a glance here on the timeline of the French Revolution, we see that these subheadings here in 1789, these three subheadings here, July 14th, 1789, August 27th, and October 6th, all corresponded to Carlylean chapters which closed out Volume 1. So he had a big build-up in Volume 1 to the Bastille, and then he had it in Book 5, which is the Siege and Surrender of Bastille. Book 6 he called Consolidation, in which we had the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen. And then in Book 7, we had the Women's March on Versailles, the insurrection of the women. And now we can see the rise of political clubs are going to happen in 1790, and a year on from the Siege and Surrender of Bastille, we have the Fête de la Fédération, and that's what Carlyle's going to talk about now. So it's been a year. So was French royalty, when wrenched forth from its tapestries in that fashion on that 6th of October 1789, such a victim? Recall that Louis XVI now has to reside in Paris. So if there is another insurrection, if there's another riotous mood, and there's been tough winters, and there could be another tough winter, that he's now in the thick of it. The energy of that riot and that revolt won't dissipate by the time it would reach to Versailles, which is what we saw in the last part. So royalty was beforehand so decrepit, moribund, how much of its strength, which was of the imagination merely, has fled. Rascality, having looked plainly into the king's face, has not died. So he opens by reassessing where royalty is in France in this year, 1790. 1789 was the house caving in on the edifice of royalty. We recall when there was the procession for the new Estates General, that when the bishops and priests and the clergy class were heading to take their seats in the new Estates General in that procession in May 1789, that they derived their power from their belief in their power, is what we got at. And they had already become a sort of token institutional tick-the-box exercise, bar some players like Talleyrand, of course, was there under the auspices of being a bishop. But there wasn't a Cardinal Richelieu or Cardinal Mazarin, as there had been in the 17th century. That institution had dissipated and lost its way, mainly because, following on from Louis XVI, we had an absolute monarchy in France. But now the same thing has really occurred to the institution of monarchy itself. The house has collapsed, but the image of royalty, the figure of royalty, still stands. So we're left in that weird situation where it was moribund, it was decadent, it was prone to decrepitude, but it still exists now in this stultified form. So what will become of it? How much of its strength, which was the imagination merely, recall, says Carlyle, said the strength was always in the imagination, it was in the belief of the monarchy. So from an infinite, quite finite constitutional scarecrow, the belief in the king, in absolute monarchy, was sort of an infinite spiritual belief, and now has been reduced to the material, to the constitutional, and such is the role of the monarch being reduced, and you could say had imprisoned. It's now caged within this materiality, this constitutional scarecrow of figure of Louis XVI. Cheerfuller than watching the death struggles of royalism will it be to watch the growth and gamblings of sans-culottism. So Carlyle's going to leave the sad state of Louis XVI's entourage now, and he's going to, typical Carlylean fashion, let's follow where the energy is, and the energy is in the sans-culottes. It's in the rising advocacy class. It grows lustily, he says, just to give it this form of this hunger, this desire, this raw aspiration to rule France. They believe now that they have the right to rule, not Louis. Arthur Young has witnessed the strangest scene. Majesty walking unattended in the Tuileries gardens, and miscellaneous tricolour crowds who cheer it and reverently make way for it. The very Queen commands at lowest respect, silence, regretful avoidance. Such patriotism snarls dangerously and shows its teeth. Patriotism shall suppress. Far better royalty shall soothe down the angry hair of it by gentle pattings. So recall that the male patriotism, which will be a tax on, it would be seen as maybe someone taking it, the Republican ideal, and going for an assassination on Louis XVI, for instance. That will get quelled by patriotism, so Louis can still walk his Tuileries. It was the insurrection of the women due to the bread and pantry scarcity, which boiled up last October. So patriotism, with Lafayette in charge, is still going to work on male patriotism for now. King Louis, restorer of French liberty, as he's known. Well, man indeed, and King Louis, like other men, lives in this world to make rule out of ruleless. By his living energy, he shall force the absurd itself to become less absurd. An insight into Carlyle's vision of what majesty should mean. A maker only of world follies, though, is this Louis. Unrealities, things self-destructive, which no mortal hammering could rivet into coherence. Here sat the Queen, her young rosy boy, has she not living emblem there of hope? So, when something ill befits a monarch, there is always the hope that the next one shall be the restorer of that spiritual ideal of the monarch that Carlyle wants. And then often, it's in the next generation, it's in the son, but even if it's not, you see something where the disposition of Richard II by Henry Bolingbroke, or then in turn the disposition of Henry VI in England. And Shakespeare has written brilliantly on the themes that surrounded those replacements in his historical dramas. So that was chapter 1 in the Tuileries. Chapter 2 is in the Salle de Manége. To believing patriots, however, it is now clear that the Constitution will marche. There does the National Assembly apply itself to the miraculous work of making it march. Solid Dutch-built Pt.8, if solid, surely dull, with an ineffable serenity, sniffs great sièges aloft alone. So we've got an international flavour begins to take shape in the Salle de Manége, which is the sort of gathering area for the National Assembly elites, so to speak, that class of people. International, we have a Dutch-built Pt.8, we have a siège as well. Tuileries and parliamentary Dupont produce mountains of reformed law, liberal, Anglomaniac, available and unavailable. So there is a lot of Anglomaniacs who they want to build on the idea of what England had done 100 years earlier with the Glorious Revolution. Consolidated constitutional monarchy. Alone of all men there, Mirabeau may begin to discern clearly whither all this is tending. So Mirabeau is the kingly figure of this new regime, really. Thus, in these June days, when the question, who shall have the right to declare war, and we're in June 1790, as we said, comes on, you hear horse hawkers sound dolefully through the streets, grand treason of Count Mirabeau, price only 1 sou. So, this is an interesting question, though. You're in a constitutional monarchy now, but there's threats, right? England, when it became a constitutional monarchy, it was very soon after, within 25 years, that it created the Acts of Union with Scotland. What that did was cement itself as an island nation. Could not be penetrated by war other than by invasion. So I think when you're declaring an act of war and so on, it's a different beast than if you're France, right? Austria holds lands in the Low Countries in this time, and they are seen as the reactionary regime who do not like what's happened in 1789 and would like to reverse it. So if it comes to the case that France need to declare war, does that right fall to Louis? Does it fall to the National Assembly? If it falls to the National Assembly, who roles within the National Assembly can actually declare that. So it's an important thing. And what has happened here is the figure of Mirabeau has formed as a de facto king. So it will be him if it were to happen. But we'll see what happens to Mirabeau in time. Unhappily, our National Assembly has too much to do of France to regenerate, and France is short of so many requisites, short even of cash. To appease the deficit, we venture on a hazardous step, sale of clergy's lands and superfluous edifices, when we'd seen England do something similar in previous centuries. Bankruptcy, we may say, was come, and as the end of all delusions needs come must. So, interesting phrase by Carlyle. We live in an age of extreme debt in our current age, and I think even recently, you see people like Peter Hitchens as the last bastion of balanced budget, sense of self, like debt will always rein itself in. We've pushed the boundary further than I think many would have deemed it possible, but so much so now that perhaps we are in walking hubris, or else we've, others would have you on the left, would have you say, you get to modern monetary theory and so on, and they are less skeptical of this. You could almost call it divine reckoning, right? The reckoning of the balanced budget. But for Carlyle, of course, that is paramount, and his whole worldview would resound around that. These would be gold-based currencies. There was a material, tangible inescapableness of the monetary system at the time, and if you were seen as a nation to renege on your debts in a multipolar world that France lived in the 1790s, it would be warning signs for invasion. It would be warning signs for capitulation of the state entirely. So it would be quite drastic. And all of the fancy Anglomaniac liberal treaties, new legislation being written by the likes of Sieyès and so on, it can go to the birds, because the old problem that we had in the first volume, that the controller of the finances had to deal with, think Necker, think Lomenie, that still resides. The trouble of the 1780s will still exist. That financial trouble will still exist in the month of June 1790 for these French. Clerical property may be made the nations, though. This is one way of relieving the deficit. Provinces become new uniform départements. This is really around tax collection, right? So let's have a better system of collecting tax to resolve this. The 12 old parlements, too, what is to be done with them? As we recall, Parliament of Paris was closed, but there was 12 other parliaments around France. They still nominally exist at this moment in time. There's been a National Assembly, a General Assembly, yes. They even changed the name of that to a Constituent Assembly. Same device, though, just a different name. But different devices, the older devices, the regional parlements, they still exist. So what's to be done with them? Well, the old parliaments are declared to all be in permanent vacation. So basically put on gardening leave. They don't know what to do with them. We reach the 13th of November 1790 when Mayor Bailly shall walk to the Palais de Justice. Few even heeding him, and with municipal seal stamp and little hot wax seal up the parliamentary paper rooms, and the dread Parliament of Paris pass away into chaos, gently as does a dream. So the old parliaments sort of fade out. Not so the clergy. The clergy have means and material, means of number, organisation, social weight, and material at lowest of public ignorance, known to be the mother of devotion. And the mother of devotion there is a reference to Jeremy Taylor, his 1657 treaty to a person newly converted to the Church of England. Ignorance is the mother of devotion, is the direct quote. We've also had him call out of the ruleless, which was a direct call to Aristotle's Politics. Scarcely after 15 months debating, can a civil constitution of the clergy be so much as got to paper? Cant of Catholicism raging on the one side and sceptic heathenism on the other. Finance and constitution, law and gospel, surely there were work enough. Yet this is not all, so there's more headaches to deal with. Heavy-laden National Assembly, it has to hear the innumerable news of fresh revolts, brigand expeditions of chateaux in the west, especially the Châtiers, set on fire, of cities in the south full of heats and jealousies. Also it has to hear of the royalist Champ de Jales. Also it has to hear, so it's just listing kind of the reactionary, counter-revolutionary forces which are happening outside of Paris. Paris has a hold on its revolutionary epicenter, but France is a large place, and the regions are rebelling against this, because they don't see it as the people's revolution. You know, we have Robespierre constantly going on, le peuple, peuple. They see it as Parisians doing what Parisians want to, but it's not necessarily what they, in their outer region, would like the direction of France to go in. So there's counter-revolutionary sentiment all around. So also we hear not only of Brissot and his friends of the blacks, but by and by a whole Saint Domingo blazing skyward. And this is, of course, the Saint Dominique French colony of the Caribbean island, Hispaniola, where the decision by the Constituent Assembly in May 1791 to grant citizenship to affranchis, mostly wealthy mulattoes, provoked violence between European planters and slaves. The upheaval led to the abolition of slavery in 1794 and the creation of an independent Haiti in 1804. The seeds of that are all here in this year, 1790. There's falling Bastilles, insurrection of women's, thousands of smoking manor houses, a country bristling with no crop but that of sans-culotte steel. Man lives by hope. Pandora, when her box of God's gifts flew all out and became God's curses, still retained hope. Oh, infatuated sans-culottes of France, revolt against constituted authorities. Hunt out your rightful seigneurs, who at the bottom so loved you, and readily shed their blood for you. In country's battles as at Rossbach and elsewhere, and even in preserving game or preserving you, could you but have understood it? Hunt them out, then, as if they were wild wolves, set fire to their chateaux and chatiers as to wolf dens. And what then? So they're hating their own out of suspicion, when, when those usual to power have that fragility, the suspicion grows and you want to turn against them. But powerful words, right? Even when in preserving game, they were preserving you. So you're throwing stones at your own house by attacking your own aristocracy. That's the Carlyle view. Poor Favras. He keeps dictating his will, his last will at the Hotel de Ville. The whole remainder of the day, a weary February day. People I die innocent pray for me. Poor Favras. These are sort of outgoing characters who were trying to keep this in a balanced view, right? They're trying to be one of the more moderate of the revolutionaries. Let an august National Assembly make a 4th of August abolition of feudality. Declare the clergy state servants, who shall have wages. Vote suspensive vetoes, new law courts, vote or decree to what contested thing it will, have it responded to from our 4 corners of France. Nay, get king's sanction and what other acceptance were conceivable. So Carlyle's just kind of trivializing it a little bit, but, he's saying, oh yeah, just throw all the power into the Constituent Assembly. Why not? Why not? Why all these things that were rooted in aristocracy for reasons of stability and reasons of duty and intergenerational solidarity? Just give it all to the Constituent Assembly. Figure the brass head of an Abbé Mouret, flooding the 4th Jesuitic eloquence in the strain. Dusky d'Espremesnil, Barrel Mirabeau, cheering him from the right. Robespierre eyes him from the left. And how Sieyes ineffably sniffs on him. Here no victory yet definable can be considered as final. So France continues to really be in tumult. These prating senators of yours hover ineffectual on the barren letter, and will never save the revolution. A Cassandra Marat cannot do it with his single shrunk arm, but with a few determined men it were possible. Such produce shall the time ripen in carnivorous Marat, the man forbid, living in Paris cellars lone as fanatic anchorite in his Thebaid. Say as far seen Simon on his pillar, name him as Demoulin as maximum of patriotism, and Cassandra Marat. So, just more characters. Marat, Demoulin, whole vying for power. After this manner, in these circumstances, do august senators regenerate France? Nay, they are, in very deed, believed to be regenerating it. Again, that idea of whether they're regenerating France or not doesn't matter, because they are believed to be regenerating France. On account of which great fact, main fact of their history, the wearied eye can never be permitted wholly to ignore them. Sans-culottism has the property of growing, by what other things die of. By agitation, contention, disarrangement, nay, in word, by what is the symbol and fruit of all these? Hunger. Sanculotism is like an alien being. You think of it like an alien being in a sci-fi movie or something. It is alien or unnatural in Carlyle's mind. So it's like an alien in the sense that, it's feeding on the power, the waning power of other institutions, and that being agitation, or it smells fear, this sort of thing. But that is what Alien is, and that's what the 1979 movie Alien thrives on. Alien means other, means unknown, means foreign, something that emerges from the abyss, right? So similar to an alien extraterrestrial would emerge from the abyss of space. This alien, in political form, Sanculotism, has emerged from the abyss of the revolution. The provinces, southern cities, feel it in their turn. What it brings: exasperation, preternatural suspicion. The month is still October when famishing Saint Antoine, in a moment of passion, seizes a poor baker, innocent, Francois the baker, and hangs him. Loi martiale, a kind of riot act, begins. Let no mortal say henceforth that an august National Assembly wants riot, though. All it ever wanted was riot enough to balance court plotting. All it now wants, of heaven of earth, is to get its theory of defective verbs perfected, which is Carlyle terminology for them to write this ridiculous piece of legislation, which is going to be trivial, it's going to be unreadable, it's going to be bureaucratic nonsense, it's not going to be something that's going to deliver action. So he calls it, they may as well be writing this theory of defective verbs. But to the member of the assembly, it's the Holy Grail, right? They're going to get this constitution sorted, and then that's going to fix France. Chapter 3. The muster. With famine and constitutional theory of defective verbs going on, all other segment is conceivable. Dogleach Marat. We've seen him call Marat Dogleach before. Now far seen as Simon Stylites, we already know him and others raised aloft. Chaumet and by Anaxagoras Chaumet. These are half original men. Accordingly, of all classes, the rising one we observe is now the attorney class. Well, I've called them the advocacy class, he's calling them the attorney class, but it's the same sentiments, right? Witness Bazir, Carrier, Fouquier-Tinville, Bassoche Captain Bourdon. More than enough. And I won't go into the lives of these. This is just Carlyle listing instances of this growing class. Great and greater waxes the President Danton's Cordelier section. Remark, on the other hand, how General Dumouriez has quitted Normandy and Cherbourg breakwater to come, whither we may guess. It is his second or even third trial at Paris since this new era began. So you have a growth of an advocacy class, so they're very suspicious of the old generals, right? Lafayette's kind of with them to a point, and then no further. So what about the other generals? So Dumouriez has been on trial like 3 times. They don't trust him. When he talks of Dumouriez overfalling Corsican batteries, Dumouriez was specifically served in campaigns in Corsica in 1768 and 69, which was the taking of Corsica for France, which of course has great repercussions for the likes of Napoleon as well later on, remember. So the fact they're putting Dumouriez on trial, shows how patriotic are these so-called patriots, right? Not from over France only are the unrestful flocking towards Paris, but from all sides of Europe. This is what we talked about. There's an international flavour coming to this National Assembly now. Think of it as the first internationale, right? Where the carcasses, thither will the eagles gather, though, says Carlyle. So that's his opinion of the internationale. Think how many a Spanish Guzman, Martinico Fernier, named Fernier l'Américain, engineer Miranda from the very Andes. We've got Jewish or German phrase. We've got Tartuffe, we've got Frederic Barentranc. Now is our England without her missionaries, her Paine, rebellious staymaker, unkempt, who feels that he, a single needleman, did by his common sense pamphlet Free America. Price Stanhope, Constitutional Association, sends over to congratulate, welcomed by National Assembly, though they are but a London club, whom Burke and Toryism eye askance. Oh, Chevalier Jean-Paul, we have. And we have, but of all strangers, far the notablest for us is Baron Jean-Baptiste de Cloutz, or Drooping Baptisms and Feudalisms. World Citizen. Anacharsis Cloots from Cleves, mark him, judicious reader. This is the man Carlyle's talking about, Anacharsis Cloots. He symbolises more than anything the international appeal that everyone sees in the French Revolution. Perhaps the first to advocate a world parliament, a world federalist, international anarchist. Born near Cleves in 1792, he placed 12,000 lire at the disposal of the French Republic for the arming of 40 or 50 fighters in the cause of man against tyranny. This is the sort of mind you get. The breaking of the revolution, he returns to Paris, the opportunity favourable for establishing his dream of universal family of nations. He has seen English Burke, this is Cloots, of the Portuguese Inquisition, has roamed and fought and written, is writing, among other things, evidences of the Mohammedan religion. But now, like his Scythian adoptive godfather, he finds himself in Paris, the Paris Athens, surely at last, the haven for his soul. There is a paradise discoverable, thinks Cloots. We also have atheist Naigeon, beloved disciple of Diderot, crows in his small, difficult way, heralding glad dawn. So, just an indication there of the sort of characters who have come. This is the muster, right? Chapter 3 is called the muster, and this is the muster that Carlyle's talking about, this international gathering. Eagles gather was reference to Matthew. And when we talk about Cloots there at the end, he has seen the English Burke. Cloots visited Burke in 1784 and claimed that they shared similar opinions on political reform. Burke denounced the French Revolution in his reflections and wrote dismissively of Cloots in his letters on a regicide peace in 1796. So, I think he's an aloof dreamer, this Cloots, personally. You read Burke, he knows where the revolution's going. This guy Cloots goes to Paris and thinks there's going to be one world government about to begin. It's just ridiculous. And we can see here already his page's execution. Excluded the insistence of Maximilien Robespierre from the Jacobin Club. He remained a foreigner in many eyes. This guy is a loser, one of life's great losers. We're on to chapter 4. Journalism. Okay, so of course there's going to be some journalism. We've had the advocacy class, and there should be a journalistic class with that as well, right? Think back to book 2 of volume 1, which was the paper age, which was the beginning of all of this. So, of course, journalism's going to have a say now. President Danton in open hall with reverberating voice declares that in a case like Marat's, force may be resisted by force. So already we have the president of the National Assembly, Danton, this huge burly man that you may recall from the previous part, declare the force can be recognized by force. So, sort of an enlightened ideal is that then? That's the primitivism, that's barbarism, right? Municipality and Bissau, meanwhile, afar on their municipal constitution, the 60 districts shall become 48 sections. Oh, great, terrific progress being made. Much shall be adjusted, and Paris shall have its constitution, wholly elective, as indeed all French government shall and must be. Everyone needs to be this ideal of the citoyen actif. One sans-culotic bow, though, cannot fail to flourish, is journalism. The voice of the people, having been the voice of God. Mirabeau himself has his instructive journal or journals with Geneva Hadman working in them. Interesting to talk of Genevan Hodmen working for Mirabeau's journals, because before we had distrust of things like Swiss guards being called in to quell tumults because they weren't seen as generally French, from which you got this idea of patriotism fermenting. But Mirabeau's happy to use his Swiss hodmen as well for journalistic purposes. The useful Moniteur, for it is now become diurnal. We have Acid Lustalot, we have Revolution de Paris. These are the journals being listed. So, previous chapter 3, the muster, he's talking about the international appeal of people flocking to France after the revolution. And now he's talking about the propping up of all these journals. Louvet, busy yet with a new charming romance, shall write Sentinelle. Great is journalism, says Carlyle. Is not every able editor a ruler of the world, being a persuader of it, though self-elected, yet sanctioned by the sale of his numbers? Such is journalism, hawked, past, and spoken. since the first Venetian news sheet was sold for a Gaza, from which we get the word gazette, or farthing, named Gazette, says Carlyle, we live in a fertile world. Chapter 5, Clubbism. So, think of these as avenues, right? You had the Tuileries in chapter 1, basically like a cage for the king. You had the Salle de Manége. What are the members of the assembly actually doing? And then he's had the growing things that happen around the revolution and around the new assembly, which was the international appeal, the muster, the journalists, and now chapter 5, Clubbism, the thriving clubs. Old clubs which already germinated, grow and flourish, new everywhere and bud forth. It is sure symptom of social unrest, though, says Carlyle. To National Assembly, to Paris, and call yourself a club. That's all you need to do. Price Stanhope English, who sent over to congratulate, we had him in the muster. He goes to the French Revolution Club. There's also the Club of Friends of the Constitution. Moreover, it has leased itself at a fair rent in the hall of the Jacobins' convent, one of our superfluous edifices, and does therefrom now in these spring months begin shining out on an admiring Paris. And so, by degrees, under the shorter popular title, Jacobins' Club, it shall become memorable to all times and to all lands. Jacobins' Club was first founded by anti-royalist deputies from Brittany in 1789, became the dominant political faction of the French Revolution, leading to the government from mid-1793 to mid-1794. It's all ahead of us, but basically the Reign of Terror, the most extreme point of the revolution. These friends of the Constitution have met mainly, as their name may foreshadow, to overlook after elections when an election comes. Think of it similar to Stalin, would have slowly gained power throughout the 1920s. Is you become in charge of the person who counts the elections, or you become the important node that everything goes to when power needs to get formulated. For Stalin, that was in the position of General Secretary of the Communist Party that Lenin gives him just before he dies. It's so powerful a position that you can certainly pull all the levers. There's an extent of that going on here. It's not as perfected as what Stalin will achieve later on, but there are elements of that. The Jacobins' Club, which at first shone resplendent and was thought to be a new celestial sun for enlightenment of the nations, had, as things all have, to work through its appointed phases. It burnt, unfortunately, more and more lurid, more sulphurous, distracted, and swam at last, though the truly astonished heaven, like a Tartarean portent and lurid burning prison of spirits in pain. The Jacobins are buried, but their work is not. It continues making the tour of the world. Hellas was resuscitated into somnambulism. Paris Jacobins became the mother society, Société Mère, and had as many as 300 shrill-tongued daughters in direct correspondence with her. So it becomes the main hub it becomes a club of clubs, really. One party, which thinks the Jacobins lukewarm, constitutes itself into the Club of the Cordeliers, a hotter club. It is Danton's element, with whom goes Desmoulins. The other party, just on that, the Club of the Cordeliers was founded in April 1790 to protect the rights of men named after the Cordelier monastery, in which the club met. Its members included Marat, Danton, and Hébert. The other party, again, which thinks Jacobism scalding hot, flies off to the right, and becomes the Club of 1789, Friends of the Monarchic Constitution. They are afterwards named the Feuillants Club. Lafayette is or becomes their chief man, supported by the respectable patriot everywhere. So this is the moderate, right? They, in these June days of 1790, do in the Palais Royal dine solemnly with open windows, to cheers of the people. So most people are with the moderate side. Lafayette's Club of 1789, Friends of the Monarchic Constitution. Then you have a Jacobin Club, which they consider scalding hot. And then even further to the left, you have the Dantons and the Desmoulins in the Cordeliers. Another expressly monarchic or royalist club is the Club des Monarchiens, though a club of ample funds, and all sitting on a damask sofas, cannot realise the smallest momentary cheer. So even further to the right, it has no support. Are not such societies an insipid new order of society itself? Well, it's something to consider, isn't it? Chapter 6. Je le jure. In the death tumults of sinking society, French hope sees only the birth struggles of a new, unspeakably better society. That idea of hope, right? Even as Pandora had unleashed the box, she had hope, said Carlyle. King Louis is not without hope in the chapters of chances, in a flight to Saint-Beuillet, in getting popularized at Paris. This is the sign of the times, as he quotes Matthew. Now, Beuillet is a character who's going to come in the next part. He's out in the east of France and can be seen as a counter-revolutionary force. Much nearer is the fact of the 1,200 kings who sit in the Salle de Manége. So, okay, Carlyle has called Mirabeau a king, but now is descending into a position where they all consider themselves kings. So there's effectively 1,200 kings in the Salle de Manége, where the National Assembly sat. So it's meant to invoke farce. But there is always Austria lurking as well. That's the hope. The other hope, the external hope for Louis. On the 4th of February, accordingly, Monsieur le Président reads to his National Assembly a short autograph announcing that His Majesty will step over quite in an unceremonious way, probably about noon. 1,200 kings, almost all, in the galleries no less, do welcome the restorer of French liberty with royal shouts, so Louis enters the National Assembly. His Majesty's speech, in diluted conventional phraseology, expresses this mainly, that he, most of all Frenchmen, rejoices to see France getting regenerated. So the ventriloquist can make the dummy king say what he wants, really, can't he? The president swears and declares that everyone shall swear in distinct je le jure. This is the swearing that goes before the National Assembly. Or the Constituent Assembly, as I should be calling it. Bailly, Mayor of Paris, the great tennis court swearer, again swears toward nightfall, with all the municipals and the heads of districts assembled there. This was the 4th of February, 1790, a day to be marked white in constitutional annals. The ancient Romans marked their days of good fortune with chalk, right? So this is meant to be the great coming of age, the settlement of the Constituent Assembly. Now the king lives in Paris, he's come in, he's sworn in. Official precedence is kind of given to it in the eyes of many. Faithful to the king, to the law, to the constitution, which the National Assembly shall make. So there's the only snag, isn't it? Still hasn't made the constitution. Right. Chapter 7, Prodigies. To such length had the contrat social brought it, in believing hearts. Man, as is well said, lives by faith. Each generation has its own faith, more or less, and laughs at the faith of its predecessor. Interesting saying to think of in today's time, right? Each generation has its own faith and laughs at its predecessor. Freedom by social contract now is the one of 1790. Such was the gospel of the era. Faith merely in the everlasting nothing in man's digestive power, lower than which no faith can go. Most Talleyrand bishopship, so yeah, this is the faith in the contract social gets you characters like Talleyrand as bishop, right? All loyal obedience, all religious faith was to expire in final night enveloped in the destinies of man. Plots to emigration, with pledge of war, to monarchic clubs, nay, still madder things. So the new faith is kind of like an infection, though, because the zeal that it generates is of extreme suspicion, because they understand the fragility of their own faith, and the power that faith has just attained. It's fragile. Notable, however, was the magnetic vellum magnétique of the Sieurs, Dozier, and Petit Jean, parliamenters of Rouen. And we're on to Chapter 8, Solemn League and Covenant. If grains are defective, the fault is not with nature or the National Assembly, but of art, anti-national intriguers, right? So this is the infection growing. The Scotch, believing in a righteous heaven above them and also in a gospel for others than the Jean-Jacques one. Right, so the Jean-Jacques social contract is now the gospel. But here the Scotch swore in their own way, says Carlyle, in their extreme need of solemn league and covenant, in their tough old Saxon Hebrew Presbyterian way, this sort of hodgepodge Scottish Knoxian way. And to read more about that, you can go on to the lecture 5 of the recording I have on Carlyle's Great Men, which talks about Knox. The French, too, with their Gallic ethnic excitability and effervescence, have, as we have seen, real faith, a sort of they are hard bestead, Though in the middle of hope, a national solemn league and covenant there may be in France too, under how different conditions and how different developments and issue. On the 29th day of last November, while national guards by the thousands seen filling from far and near with military music, with municipal officers and tricolour sashes towards and along the Rhone stream to the little town of Etoile. This was the mild end of November 1789. Ceremonial revolution, a manoeuvre done by the guards, basically. Their marching constitutionally wheel in the sarsaparang mood of fife and drum under the tricolour municipals. Clear gleaming phalanxes, or halt with the uplifted right hand and artillery salvos that imitate Jove's thunder. The general ear is filled with federation, or fédération. Resculpting of the army, we'd seen it as a hot topic before, and Carl was just talking about the manoeuvres they've done since July 1789, between July 1789 and July 1790, which sort of solidified the army as a wing of the assembly. At Lyon, in the middle of the month of May, we behold as many as 50 or some 60,000 met to federate France. Because you destroyed the old parlements, right? Or send them on a permanent vacation. So the idea of federation is going to be one that takes form in the idea of in people's heads about this new constitution. Narrative of it in the Champagne's Courrier de Lyon piece, which circulates to the extent of 60,000, which one would like now to read. But on the whole, Paris, we may see, will have little to devise. We'll only have to borrow and apply. And then as to the day, what day of all calendar is fit, if the Bastille anniversary be not. So they're thinking, well, this great symbolic achievement that we've had for the last year will happen in Paris on the anniversary of the Bastille. And that's the Fête de la Fédération, this idea of the federation, this invocation of France as a constitutional monarchy, as a federation with the National Constituent Assembly at the head, is going to happen on the anniversary of the fall of the Bastille. What is man? So that's where we are now, chapter 9, Symbolic. What is man's whole terrestrial life but a symbolic representation and making visible of the celestial, invisible force that is in him? No scenic individual, with knavish, hypocritical views, will take the trouble to soliloquize a scene, and now consider is not a scenic nation placed precisely in that predicament of soliloquizing. So I think Carlyle sees this as, it's symbolic, as we said. It's on the anniversary of the fall of the Bastille, this Fête de la Fédération. But what do we mean by federation? The people in Lyon probably meant different than the people in the Rhone Valley. Certainly the advocacy class they're in charge, but they are a complete minority of France who have seized power and placed themselves into the National Assembly, that new vehicle of power. We see 1,200 kings, as Carlyle calls them. Federation's a word, right? It's not a system. It's not an operating, thriving France. So this is a symbolism of triumph, but I think Carlyle is still wondering, where is the substance? And we look at all these people celebrating themselves in the Champ de Mars. This is the Fête de la Fédération of 1790. The Reign of Terror is just around the corner, right? Chapter 10, Mankind. Let the French National Solemn League and Federation be the highest record of triumph of the thespian art. The whole nation gone mumming deserves so much, so it's all just pageantry. But deserves not that loving minuteness of a monadic insurrection did. So Carlyle here is going to say, I gave a lot of time and detail to the insurrection of the what he calls the Menads, the insurrection of the women, in the last part, which was Book 7 of Volume 1. Now, Book 1 of Volume 2, Fête de la Fédération, it's a mummer's farce. There was real hunger driving that insurrection of women. This is pageantry and self-aggrandizement beyond that which perhaps you should have. It's hubris, and it will meet with nemesis. So I'm going to paint its picture, but I'm not going to go into the same level of detail. One scene, though, however, the hastiest reader will momentarily pause on. So he's going to give us one scene. That of Anarchus Cluse, Anacharsis Cluse, I should say, and the collective sinful posterity of Adam. So back to this muppet here, right? Anacharsis Cluse. And again, look where he's going. Execution. One world government, but always seen as a foreigner in his one world government. What a fate. As many as 15,000 men, spademen, barrowmen, stone builders, rammers, with their engineers are most at work at the Champ de Mars, which is the picture we saw here. This is the erection he's talking about. Hollowing it out into the National Amphitheatre fit for such solemnity. It doesn't look too solemn to me. For one may hope it will be annual and perennial, a feast of the Pikes. Fête des Pikes, where we get the book's name from. It's called the Fête de la Fédération, but for Carlyle it was the Feast of Pikes, because that's what you've unleashed. You've unleashed terror. Humankind, namely le genre humain itself, is to be celebrated, isn't it? In what rapt creative moment the thought rose in Anacharsis' soul, enough that on the 19th evening of June 1719, Anacharsis Close, entering the august Salle de Manége, with the human species at his heel, Swedish, Spanish, Polacks, this is Klutz's ideal. I've got the whole species. We're all just one species, and we will all have one government. We are enlightened now. Our ambassador titles, said the fervid Klutz, are not written on parchment, but on the living hearts of all men. From President Sieyès, who presides this remarkable fortnight, in spite of his small voice, there comes eloquent, though shrill reply. Anacharsis and the Foreigners' Committee shall have the place of the Fédération. Anacharsis and mankind accept the honours of the sitting. What absolute farce. So Anacharsis storms into the assembly claiming, I represent all of mankind, and give me my place at this fête. In a word, feudalism being dead these 10 months, right since the August decree, August 1789, why should her empty trappings and scutcheons survive? It is true, envy did, in after times, pervert the course of Anacharsis, making him, from incidental Speaker of the Foreign Nations Committee, claim to be the official permanent Speaker Auditor of the human species. So what are you? Are you just this token Johnny foreigner given a nice little lapdog place, seat in the National Assembly, and then you believe because you've gotten that you are an orator of the entire human species? This is the hubris, this is the nonsense that it persists in Klutz's mind. Having seen the human species itself, to have seen the dean of the human species, ceased now to be a miracle. Such doyen de genre humain, eldest of men, had shown himself there in these weeks. Jean-Claude Jacob, born serf, deputed from his native Jure mountains to thank the National Assembly for enfranchising them. On his bleached, worn face, applied with furrows of 120 years, he has heard dim patois talk of immortal grand monarch victories, of a burnt palatinate, as he toiled and moiled to make a little speck of this earth greener, of Cevennes dragoonings, of Marlborough going to war. 4 generations have bloomed and loved and hated in Rasseldorf. He was 46 when Louis XIV died. The assembly, as one man, spontaneously rose and did reverence to the eldest of the world. Old Jean is to take the séance among them. Honourably, with covered head. He gazes feebly there with his old eyes. This old John. Oldest guy they can see, right? It's wisdom in the old. So perhaps there's something nice here. But, Carlyle continues, on that new wonder seen, dreamlike to him and uncertain, wavering mid fragments of old memories and dreams, for time is all growing, unsubstantial, dreamlike. Jean's eyes and mind are wary, and about to close, and open on a far other wonder seen, which shall be real. Patriot subscription, royal pension was got for him, and he returned home glad. But in 2 months more he left it all, and went on his unknown way. Jean there sort of being like Father Time. Carlyle just stole this character from, he got it from Deux Amis, 2 friends, this French work, and he said, I want to put that in my French Revolution because that's like Father Time getting this great invitation to the feast. Chapter 11. As in the age of gold. Fatherland's altar, Hotel de la Patrie in the centre, also to be raised and stair-stepped. Force work with a vengeance, it is a world's amphitheatre. It's the age of gold, it's just the continuation of the feast, right? Is it aristocrats secretly bribing? Aristocrats were capable of that, though. Suspicion. On the 1st of July, Monday, scarcely has the signal cannon boomed, scarcely have the languescent mercenary 15,000 laid down their tools. Why wait? Spades elsewhere exist, and so now bursts forth that effulgence of Parisian enthusiasm, good-heartedness, and brotherly love, such, if chroniclers are trustworthy, as was not witnessed since the age of gold. Yes, pardieu, ce sera, cry the passengers in the streets. A stirring city from the time you reach the Place Louis XV. Amiable infants, aimable enfants. The printers have come marching, prud'homme, all in paper caps with the Revolution of Paris. We've got young boarding school boys, college students, shout Vive la Nation and regret they have yet only their sweat to give. We have the fervent children of the South who glory in their Mirabeau. We've got the noblest fire of patriotism. Reviews, also there must be, royal federate reviews with king and queen and tricolour court looking on. Too hasty dauphins shall be admonished. Salute then, monsieur, don't be impolite. And therewith she, and like a bright sky wanderer or planet, with a little moon, issues forth peculiar. Le Pelletier Saint-Fargeau, a mere private senator, but with great possessions as daily his 100 dinner guests, the table of Generalissimo Lafayette, may double that number. So this is the feast going on in the summer of 1790. And we'll conclude it with Chapter 12, Sound and Smoke. And so now, in spite of plodding aristocrats, lazy hired spademen, and almost of destiny itself, Champ de Marche on the 13th of the month is fairly ready, trimmed, rammed, buttressed with firm masonry. First anniversary, crucial to the creation of a myth, right? Pull down thy nightcap, therefore, and with demi-articulate grumble, significant of several things, go pacified to sleep again. Tomorrow is Wednesday morning, the unforgettable among the fasties of the world. Again, he's taking a lot of his sources here, the Histoire Parlementaire. 200,000 patriotic men and twice as good 100,000 patriotic women, all decked and glorified as one can fancy, sit waiting in the Champ de Marche. This is the scene. This is the Fête de la Fédération. Oh, glorious France that has burst out so into universal sound and smoke and attained the Phrygian cap of liberty. Right, that Phrygian cap, which is so associated with the French Revolution. This sort of thing, right? Heaven grew black, though. Portend. Moaning cold moisture began to sing, and there descended a very deluge of rain. Sad to see. The general's sash runs water. How all military banners droop and will not wave, but lazily flap as if metamorphosized into painted tin banners. Talleyrand performs his miracle. The blessings of Talleyrand, and other than that of Jacob, is on all 83 departmental flags of France. Behold, then, also the ruins of Bastille. There, under the free sky, do tight-limbed federates, with the fairest new-found sweethearts elastic as Diana, and not of that coyness and tart humour of Diana, thread their jocund mazes all through their ambrosial night. Feast of Pikes has danced itself off, and become defunct, and the ghost of a feast. Nothing of it now remains but this vision in men's memory. Undoubtedly one of the memorablest national high tides. The French nation has led royalty, or wooed and teased poor royalty, to lead her to the hymeneal fatherland's altar. And that was the Feast of the Pikes.